right. Okay. All right. Hello, class. My name is Chris, and I'm accompanied by Caitlin, Aaron, Abigail, and Alexis. And um, our heavy history topic is the case of Loving versus Virginia. It's a very interesting case, and I feel like we all were able to learn some pretty influential stuff about this case. So, hope you enjoy our presentation.
So, Loving versus Virginia was a Supreme Court case regarding state laws that ban interracial marriage in the United States. So, the case involved Mildred Jeter, who is pictured on the left, who was a 17-year-old African American woman, and Richard Loving, who was a 23-year-old Caucasian male. Loving and Jeter married on June 2nd in 1958 in Washington, D.C., where their interracial marriage was considered legal. And then after being married, they returned to their home in Virginia shortly after. On June 11th, the Commonwealth Attorney for Carolina County had a warrant issued for their arrest, and the two were sent to jail. So the warrant was issued for their arrest because their marriage was considered illegal within the state, and that happened on in October of 1958 by the Circuit Court of Caroline County. Sorry. So they ended up pleading guilty and received a 1-year suspended sentence. So the 1-year suspended sentence actually allowed them to, instead of going to jail, leave the state of Virginia and not return for 25 years together. So the sentence ended up allowing them to return to the state separately when, for example, Mildred returned to the state of Virginia for the birth of two of her children. The two worked together through their case to try both at the state and federal appeals until in March of '66, when the Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals maintained their anti-miscegenation law, meaning a law against marriage among different races. So next slide, please. So the Lovings appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1967 with help from the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, after the Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals ruled against them in '66. And it's important to note that at this time, 16 states in the U.S. still maintained laws against interracial marriage. They argued that laws such as the Virginia law on the left, which was called the Law to Preserve Racial Integrity, they argued that it went against the 14th Amendment, which gives equal protection under the law by taking possible spouses and their children's civil rights because of their race only. On June 12th of 1967, the Supreme Court came to their decision and ruled unanimously in favor of the Lovings, which meant that the Virginia law was deemed as a violation of the 14th Amendment, and any law similar to that law was deemed unconstitutional.
The importance of the Loving versus Virginia and like history is that when we talk about like civil rights in America, this is one of like the landmark court cases that comes up in the fight for racial equality. And that's often what people think back to, especially back in 2017 when we celebrated the 50th anniversary of this case being decided. That was one of the like just key things that has gone throughout the civil rights movement. It's also set the precedent kind of for some things that we've seen occur here, like recently within the last year, is that there have been multiple injustices and pieces of racial inequality that we've seen within society. But like this case in particular, and these individuals went against court after court after court and kept fighting and kept pushing no matter how many times their case was denied or that it wasn't even heard before court or that they received a jail sentence. It's kind of inspired a lot of individuals who are facing racial inequality to continue to push forward, not even just here in the United States, but also in other countries across the world. We talked about just a couple of minutes ago that a lot of the times when they would go before courts and other courts would hear them, and there was multiple other cases kind of occurring around the same time, that it was talking about the 14th Amendment and what exactly the 14th Amendment did. When they were denying the appeals to this conviction, a lot of the courts were saying that since both parties were equally affected and were both equally punished, and also both parties were equally violating the law, that it was not going in violation of the 14th Amendment, and therefore it was constitutional. So after the Supreme Court finally overturned this ruling, it proved kind of what the 14th Amendment actually meant. And there was a specific segment of that constitutional amendment that said that it guaranteed all citizens equal protection of the law. And this case in itself provided a better definition to that and set the precedent for a lot of future Supreme Court cases to know exactly what that law means and what that constitutional amendment means for other people now. And you can go to the next slide if you don't mind. So the implications of Loving versus Virginia on society, this picture that you see here, the woman standing next to the grave of Mildred and Richard is actually one of their granddaughters. And I think she kind of summed it up best of what this implication had on society. And she said that the lesson that they taught the world is if it's genuine love, then color doesn't matter. And that's definitely a trend that we saw when it came after the court case, like within recent years. It took it a couple more time, but we saw all of the states that were still banning interracial marriage, that was wiped off the books, and suddenly those marriages were now legal. A big thing is that that we can think about to put this into perspective is how many couples that we know personally that are married interracially, and how many of them would technically, if this hadn't ever happened, would have been in jail or would have faced hefty fines and other things of that nature. So that's one of the biggest ones. But and you can see here, there's a mention of how many newlyweds now are interracial couples and things like that. But it's also set a big thing for understanding, it's made society more accepting of interracial marriages, which is kind of really cool to see. Is that back then, when it was in the eyes of the law wrong to marry interracially, a lot of people were not in favor of that, and they were very, very much against it. And as time has went on, once this was finally deemed unconstitutional to prevent people from marrying who they choose, we've seen more acceptance of that. And so not only has it had societal implications there, but it's also a precedent for other cases like the legalization of marijuana and things. In some states where that was previously illegal and they've suddenly made it legal, they've seen a trend also in society becoming more accepting of that being a thing, since it's now no longer wrong in the eyes of the law. So it's also kind of interesting from a psychological standpoint of how this one case also changed society's perception.
So, the Loving versus Virginia was a popular court case that left a powerful legacy. The rule of the court, which states state bans on interracial marriages are unconstitutional, still remains intact today. Loving versus Virginia has increased the percentage of interracial marriages in today's society. Today, 1 in 6 newlyweds in the United States has a spouse of a different race or ethnicity. The landmark case changed the mindset towards marrying different races. In 1999, 63% of non-Black adults said they would be very or somewhat opposed to a close relative marrying a Black person. Today, the figure is 14%, a big difference. The ruling of Loving versus Virginia is now used as reasoning for the acceptance of gay marriages. In the Supreme Court case, Justice Anthony Kennedy cited the ruling in his court opinion, stating, "The court has long held the right to marry is protected by the Constitution. For example, Loving versus Virginia invalidated bans on interracial unions. The ruling of Loving versus Virginia will continue to have historical significance in our society for many years." Next slide. On this slide, there are 2 images of graphs based on interracial marriages after the Loving versus Virginia case. In the first graph, it is seen that in 1967, 3% of all newlyweds were married to someone of a different race or ethnicity. By 1980, the share of intermarried newlyweds had about doubled to 7%, and by 2015, the number rose to 17%. The second graph shows recently married Blacks with a spouse of a different race or ethnicity has more than tripled from 5% in 1980 to 18% in 2015. The recently married Whites rate has more than doubled from 4% to 11% now.
So the Loving versus Virginia case connects to what we are talking about in our course right now. A lot of it has to do with power and privilege among different races. So because this is such an example of discrimination in Jim Crow laws, this was a large driving force, as said before, in the removal of those Jim Crow laws. Because of this trial, people are able to reflect on, you know, our past and to grow from our past. You know, this was helped in the LGBTQ movement and allowing gay marriage in 2014. And this also now helps us as intercultural communicators to better understand the kind of privilege that white people had in the 1960s. And how, you know, that was such a driving force as to all of the legislature that was made previously to the 21st century. Yeah, and now, you know, we're starting to change. So being able to learn about privilege and power and being able to like understand what we have as privilege nowadays helps us better connect this case to the course that we're learning and our futures.
And I will close with this quote from Mildred, and this was stated many years after this, you know, the incident, and you know, obviously had time to reflect. But you know, she said, "I'm still not a political person, but I am proud that Richard and my name is on a court case that can help reinforce the love, the commitment, the fairness, and the family that so many people, Black or white, young or old, gay or straight, seek in life. I support the freedom to marry for all. That's what loving and loving are all about." I think that's a very moving statement, and I think you know, as we learned in this discussion and this, you know, to this assignment, that the bravery that these two showed, obviously, you know, set the precedent for many people behind them for equal rights. So I hope that you guys enjoyed our presentation, and we enjoyed doing it. So thank you.